How many times have we heard the left wing call us extremists? Right-wing extremists who want to control the country or whatever they say. Doesn't matter how they arrived at that conclusion. Doesn't matter whether or not they have any proof to back up the claim. We're considered right-wing extremists. I want to take you back in time a little bit, because we're really going to analyze this. This is something that's long overdue. We're going to see who the real extremists of this country are. We're going to unbrand ourselves in this segment. In 1962, JFK was the President of the United States, a registered Democrat. Now, at this time in the year 1962 in America, the top marginal tax rate was 92%. Of all the tax rates that existed at the time, the very, very highest, the very tip of the iceberg, was a rate of 92% in 1962. Now, at this time, the economy was just sort of chugging along. It wasn't doing horrible, but it wasn't really improving much either. It was just kind of going through the motions. Nothing too special at all. And so what JFK did, and this was truly shocking at the time, and it's still shocking today, JFK went ahead in 1962 and gave a speech at the New York Economic Club, where he spoke about cutting taxes, essentially across the board. JFK, a registered Democrat, talking about cutting taxes massively in order to put more money into the hands of the American consumer. Listen to this part of his speech in 1962 at the New York Economic Club. This is JFK.
The worst deficit comes from a recession. And if we can take the proper action in the proper time, this can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession. That is the right kind of a tax cut, both for your family budget and the national budget, resulting from a permanent basic reform and reduction in our rate structure, a creative tax cut, creating more jobs and income, and eventually more revenue. And the right time for that kind of bill, it now appears, in the absence of an economic crisis today, and if the job is to be done in a responsible way, is January 1963. Such a bill will be presented to the Congress for action next year. It will include an across-the-board, top-to-bottom cut in both corporate and personal income taxes. It will include long-needed tax reform that logic and equity demand. And it will date that cut in taxes to take effect as of the start of next year, January 1963. The billions of dollars this bill will place in the hands of the consumer and our businessmen will have both immediate and permanent benefits to our economy. Every dollar released from taxation that is spent or invested will help create a new job and a new salary. And these new jobs and new salaries can create other jobs and other salaries, and more customers and more growth for an expanding American economy. Instead of being permanently saddled with excess planned capacity and the budgetary deficit that is created by this means, our goal must be full capacity and full employment and the budgetary surpluses that that kind of employment and capacity can produce.
Now, by today's standards, ladies and gentlemen, again, that was in the year 1962. If I went up to someone today, someone who wasn't politically involved at all, someone who didn't know a thing about American history, and I played that clip for them, and I said, can you tell me if this person is a Republican or Democrat? I would go out on a limb and guess that most people would guess that was a Republican speaking. But again, JFK was a Democrat. But he sounded like a Republican, again, talking about tax cuts and growing the economy by putting more money into the pockets of the American people. Now, 23 years later, Ronald Reagan came along in the year 1985 and again talked about cutting taxes. And I want to play this audio clip for you too. Look at how similar JFK, the Democrat, sounded to Ronald Reagan, the Republican. Listen to the similarities as they talk about cutting taxes. Here's Reagan in 1985.
In 1981, our critics charged that letting you keep more of your earnings would trigger an inflationary explosion, send interest rates soaring, and destroy our economy. Well, we cut your tax rates anyway, by nearly 25%. And what that helped trigger was falling inflation, falling interest rates, and the strongest economic expansion in 30 years. Over the course of this century, our tax system has been modified dozens of times and in hundreds of ways. Yet most of those changes didn't improve the system. They made it more like Washington itself, complicated, unfair, cluttered with gobbledygook and loopholes designed for those with the power and influence to hire high-priced legal and tax advisors. But there's more to it than that. Some years ago, an historian, I believe, said that every time in the past when a government began taxing above a certain level of the people's earnings, trust in government began to erode. He said it would begin with efforts to avoid paying the full tax. This would become outright cheating and eventually a distrust and contempt of government itself until there would be a breakdown in law and order. Well, how many times have we heard people brag about clever schemes to avoid paying taxes or watched luxuries casually written off to be paid for by somebody else, that somebody being you? I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. How would the proposal work? The present tax system has 14 different brackets of tax rates ranging from 11 to 50%. We would take a giant step toward an ideal system by replacing all that with a simple 3-bracket system with tax rates of 15, 25, and 35%. By lowering everyone's tax rates all the way up the income scale, each of us will have a greater incentive to climb higher, to excel, to help America grow. The power of these incentives would send one simple, straightforward message to an entire nation. America, go for it. To young Americans wondering tonight, where will I go? What will I do with my future? I have a suggestion. Why not set out with your friends on the path of adventure and try to start up your own business? Follow in the footsteps of those 2 college students who launched one of America's great computer firms from the garage behind their house. You too can help us unlock the doors to a golden future. You too can become leaders in this great new era of progress, the age of the entrepreneur.
See, Reagan understood the importance of empowerment. And I think that's a big thing that our leaders today are missing. But that's besides the point. You see the similarities there between JFK and Ronald Reagan. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican, both talking about cutting taxes. Now, fast forward, folks, to today, in 2014. Today, Democrats never, ever, ever call for tax cuts of any kind whatsoever. If JFK made that same speech in 1962 that if he made that speech today, he would be kicked out of the Democratic Party. He would not be considered a Democrat. Because again, today, folks, Democrats calling for tax cuts of any kind is virtually unheard of. So the question is, between the years 1962 and 2014, what has changed? What has changed the Democratic Party? Well, to be honest, it has a lot to do with the media and how the media has changed. Up until the year 1988, the liberals and the Democrats essentially had a monopoly in the media. You had CNN, you had ABC, CBS, NBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times. All very, very liberal. And what they were able to do with this monopoly is make the American people believe that liberalism was just the way things were. It went unchallenged. And so when it went unchallenged, the left wing was able to hide behind this mask of fairness. They were able to call themselves unbiased and true journalists and get away with it because no one was challenging them. Liberalism was just the way things were until the year 1988. And in the year 1988, a man by the name of Rush Limbaugh went on the radio with a nationally syndicated talk show, and he began challenging the media from a conservative point of view. And since then, of course, more and more conservative talk show hosts began emerging. We saw Fox News emerge in, I believe, the year 1997. And the liberals no longer had this monopoly in the media anymore. Their views were being challenged. And because their views were being challenged now, because liberalism was being challenged, the mask came off. This mask of fairness that they stood on, this mask of non-bias came clean off, and they were exposed for who they really were. That is a bunch of partisan journalists, quote unquote, who truly do stand for big government and the centralization of power. And they are no longer afraid to stand for it. They openly stand for liberalism, for progressivism. And as they were challenged more and more over the years, folks, that is what led to them becoming more and more extreme. So the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, whenever a liberal calls us conservatives extremists for defending the Constitution, for talking about the Founding Fathers, for protecting our God-given rights, the truth of the matter is that we're not the extremists. History shows that the left wing are the ones who have been growing more and more extreme. Us conservatives are just responding to it. We are just responding to it.